And yeah, we're good to go. So yeah, this is picking up basically halfway in between. I'm not sure if we're in the money here yet. I would assume we're at least pretty close. But yeah, we'll just pick it up from here. Um, so again, these spots are going to be kind of whatever. I think at 20 bigs, we mostly want to be flatting a hand like this. It's not really good enough to play for stacks. It's also a little bit too strong to be playing as a 3-bet bluff, and we're not quite deep enough. We're only about 20 bigs effective here, so I think we're going to be playing close to a pure call here. Oh yeah, and good point. This is a PKO as well, so some decisions may be made based on the bounties here. So we'll keep that in mind as we're going through. Appreciate that, Fountain Flood. And what
Kurt,
do
if
you?
you don't mind, can you point out specifically spots where you're only doing it PKO and what you might do if it's not? If that's like gonna take too long on each spot, that's fine. But
No, that should be
I am
okay.
curious.
Yeah, that
Okay,
shouldn't be a problem. Obviously, we can't see the numbers, but I'm gonna like if anything obviously looks a bit out of the ordinary, I think it'll be rather obvious. So I'll be able to point out why I was doing this because of the bounty and what we would normally do if this was just like a regular a non PKO format. So yeah.
You can see the bounty in the raw hand history, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, you can.
If you, yeah, I think if you find it and pull it up for, if there's ever a spot where it seems close, I think it shows it.
All right,
in the
cool,
data.
cool. So yeah, if that comes up, we'll take a look into that. So yeah, first spot here. What do you guys want to do? And again, for anybody new in here, we are posting our responses to any questions I want to ask you guys in the training sessions tab. So when I ask you guys what you want to do in a spot, just send me your reply there, and we'll go from there. And again, if there's anything you guys do need to say and you want to unmute yourself, like feel free to. But just so we avoid a lot of cross microphone action here, we're mostly going to look for responses in the training sessions tab. So yeah, versus a check we called here versus looks like an MP open. Checks to us. What do you guys want to do here? Do we check? Do we bet? Do we mix? What do we bet? Or what size do we bet if we're betting? DMC's checking. Slammer likes betting third pot. And Pete, I'll ask you once we get everybody's responses. I'll let you throw in your 2 cents, and then I'll finish it with mine. Rhodesian, mostly checking or betting quarter pot. Fountain Floods, betting third pot because this guy's 14-4 stats, seems pretty tight. Yeah, they're relatively tight. It is only 60 hands, so there is still a chance that he's just a bit card dead, so we won't look a ton into that, but definitely worth noting as well. And yeah, the opener should be relatively tight here with 20 bigs from MP. His range is going to be on the tight side for sure. And we'll wait for Joe's response and probably throw it over to you, Pete. Joe is mostly checking. If he bets flop, playing to barrel, I would assume on different runouts, we're going to have different actions, yeah. And then that's a move I bet here when check to considering stack size. So you're just pure betting here. Okay, just wait. What I mean by that is people who are tight probably 3-bet too much, so checking with 20 bigs seems weaker to me. Again, only 60 hands. Yeah, that could be true. Yeah, I assume versus checking range, there's a lot of mid pairs that won't fold the 1-bet. Charlie is betting a little more than third pot. All right. So yeah, what do you want do here, Pete?
Default check almost always, unless we had reason to believe that player's not capable of check raising. I think we have too good a hand to bet. I think we want to see turns because there's playability on turns. But getting check raised is not great because of that playability on turns. So we'd be denied that equity. And we probably still have a little bit of showdown too. So I think I would probably check back mostly.
Okay. So I'm definitely going to mix my strategy here. I think we have benefits to doing a couple things here. Checking is obviously pretty good. I think when we have like a backdoor flush draw, we are going to be more likely to be checking back here. Obviously, like anything that has a bit of equity, it kind of sucks if we bet and we get check raised off it and kind of blow the pot when we could, one, like A, have the best hand, and B, have plenty of backdoor equity that can face like turn barrels on certain cards. So I'm okay with checking here for sure. But we also kind of want to lean a little bit more towards betting with our weaker ace X's. And I don't think this hand is like just so strong that we're just going to be pure checking here so much. Again, I think it does have like pretty good backdoors here. So like if our opponent happens to call with a hand like, let's say like 10-9 or even King-9, there's going to be turns that we can also put some pressure on him that's going to make things difficult for hands like his ace-9, his pocket eights, his pocket tens, maybe some ace-3 here that we can put some pressure on. So I definitely think I'm okay with both, and I would absolutely roll here. Big surprise. But yeah, again, I think it's important to ask ourselves if we have reasons for doing both, and I can kind of see reasons for both betting and checking here. I would probably default check mostly and maybe bet like 30% of the time if I had to guess, but that's just like a random number I'm throwing out. So must have rolled low, so we ended up checking. On the turn, I'm going to assume that we are mostly calling here. I think raising would probably not be great in the spot. For one, our hand could definitely be good. We beat like any draws that our opponent could have, mainly like be like Queen 10, King 10, King Queen, King X of diamonds. So we definitely have the best hand and want to keep some of that weaker part of his range in without also like bloating the pot. There's also a chance that we are dead to hands like, you know, pocket nines, pocket jacks here. So I think just calling with the ace high here is pretty standard. And then versus check here on the river, are we turning our hand into a bluff or are we just showing down? What are you guys doing? Does Bob Dog not know he's not muted? Joe's showing down. Yeah, right, Slammer. Also chop with other ace X. Definitely check back. Yeah, so I think this one's pretty common sense. We're going to have worse hands that we need to bluff here, and we definitely have the best hands here sometimes, so I think we just pure give up in this spot. And he does have kings, which is pretty sneaky here. Like, I think his check here is kind of baller. Like, I should have a fair amount of 9x in my range here that, for one, he's going to be able to pot control, and two, if I have a hand like, let's say 10-8 suited, Queen 10, King 10, maybe even a hand like 4 or 5 of diamonds, I'm going to end up turning into a bluff. So checking here allows me to bluff with hands that might just end up folding here. Plus the 9 isn't necessarily great for him. So I'm kind of okay with this check here. Yeah, so pretty decent. Like, he can obviously bet here too. I don't mind either or, because I'm still going to have some slow play, Jack X. I'm going to have to hero here with some ace high. So yeah, I think he can definitely mix here on his part. I might be a little bit more prone to barrel with his specific hand because I'm going to have less like missed flush draws. Like, let's say hand like King 8 of diamonds, King 10 of diamonds. Although those hands probably pure give up. So yeah, kind of interesting. I would probably mix with this hand here, but either way, no big deal. Nice hand on his part. Move on to the next one. Like I said, I'm going to try to maybe not spend too much time on more of the simple parts like maybe we did there. So I'll kind of, you know, try to fly through the easy parts, and I can get you guys 2 cents for the more difficult parts. And on these boards here, these are going to be boards that we're going to be pure C betting here. These paired Broadway boards are always going to be better for us. Also, we're opening from an early position here, so that is going to give us a very strong range. So when we have a strong range and also a board that's pretty good for us, we can pretty much just default C bet our entire range on this board. So I'm going to bet every single hand I have for a small size. Take it down, pocket tens again. Okay, so we are about 40 bigs effective here. I don't know how big this guy's bounty is. I don't think it's like anything massive. We can just kind of proceed like we're playing about 40 bigs effective. So what are we doing with pocket tens here versus an open from the low jack while we're on the button? Slammer's jamming. Charlie wants to call. Joe says 3-bet and call it off if jammed on. Rhodesian says 3-bet. Actually going to pull my chart up so we can look at a couple hands here, at least from the chart that I have. Oops, we are not looking at spin and goes. Chippy B, here we go. And for 40 bigs. All right, DMC, I'll mix this hand normally, but at 40 bigs, I would probably 3-bet. Found and flood, I like a mix here with the 23K stack behind. Your hand looks weaker. Don't mind 3-betting the spot though. Yeah, I think calling to like trap is definitely a thing as well. Call to get a squeeze. Yep, agree. Same thing. Yeah, we're 40 bigs effective here at DMC. So, all right, what are you doing here, Pete? Pete's eating lunch.
I like Found and Flood's insight with the small blind stack being there, especially in a bounty. If he goes all in, then it's going to incentivize the opener to like ISO with a much wider range. So I think that's probably, because it's already going to be like, I'm pretty sure on the chart at 40 it's a mix versus low jack.
Yeah, agreed.
So I like that line of thought. So like from a slightly exploitative standpoint with the small blind stack and a PKO.
So maybe you'll end up
towards call.
So you'll end up flatting a little bit more high frequency than you normally would, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So like my queens to my tens.
Right.
Probably still always 3-betting jacks, so tens is sort of at the line, but
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And for sure, like if we 3-bet here, we definitely have to stack off. Like it kind of sucks, but you know, it is what it is. I think at 40 bigs, like I'm definitely mixing here as well. I'll pull over my chart. We are low jack to button. And you guys can see that pocket tens is where we start mixing. So Pete was on point with the jacks is mainly going to purely 3-bet. But with the small blind in there, like Pete was saying as well, maybe we end up calling a little bit more high frequency to induce a jam from the small blind. And then big blind, these stacks will like really aggressively isolate because they just don't think people are, you know, quote unquote trapping with strong enough hands in these spots. So we could there's a much better chance of us getting all this guy's chips if we just call here, this guy jams and then he rips, as opposed to him opening, us 3-betting, and then him 4-bet jamming. Like I definitely think we get him to induce with a weaker range if that were to happen. So, but yeah, this hand is still strong enough to 3-bet and play for stacks as well. So I would definitely mix here, and looks like I rolled low. So we ended up calling. And I'm sure I had that in my mind as well. Again, I don't know how big this guy's bounty is, but I'm sure that was playing into my head as well. Oh, I remember this hand. What are you guys doing here versus C-bet? It's about a third pot here, and he's betting into the button and the big blind. Found and Flood calls, Joe Beagles calls. Rhodesian's calling. Hugh Reese calling. Charlie's raising 3x. Yep, he is uncapped, that's for sure. Slammer's raising, that's move calls. So we got a bit of a mix here. What do you say, Pete?
I think default call with a little bit of raise. I'm surprised. Can mix it, but I think call's probably the play, especially with the big blind in there who can have all the 2 pairs that neither of you can have. So, yeah.
Yeah, DMC's raising as well. So I rolled here, and I'm going to try not to be results oriented because I know what happened here. But the first thing that I'm going to point out is that if he's going to bet this board, for one, there shouldn't be a lot of betting going on these low boards here for the most part. Multi-way, there's not going to be a lot of betting here, at least from the charts that I've seen, or some of the sims that I've seen. Now I can't like say this with, you know, great certainty because I've done a lot more heads up work, obviously, and haven't worked so much with these multi-way charts. But in general, and what I was saying during my stream is that if he's going to bet this board, it should probably be low frequency. And when he's betting low frequency, he's going to be betting a more polarized range. And you guys know when I say we're betting a more polarized range, we want to be using a bigger bet size here. And so this bet size, if he's going to bet, really doesn't accomplish too much. I'm defending a little bit less. Like, say if we're heads up, I'm going to be defending 80% of my range here because of the price that I'm getting in the spot. Like, I can only be folding 20% of it when he bets this size. So, like, essentially, this is not accomplishing very much. Like, he's not going to get folds almost ever. So, if he's going to be betting on a board this low, he should be using a bigger size in the spot. So, exploitively, like, if he bets bigger here, I think we just pure call. But when I see him use this size, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Plus, we have a hand that is likely ahead and can probably play for stacks and also could use quite a bit of protection. Like, literally any 3, 4, 6, 8, all change the dynamic of the board here, especially if, like, the big blind comes along too. So there's definitely reasons for both. Like, we're not just, like, fist pump getting it in for, like, 40 bigs on this board with pocket tens, but we also need to punish him by using an incorrect size here. We can't just let him get away with just like c-betting this small in every single spot when we have a hand this strong that needs a lot of protection. Like, for example, if I was ever flatting, like, I'm not flatting 40 bigs with aces, but if I were, I would definitely be more high frequency calling with aces because that hand needs less protection on future runouts when pocket tens are literally in trouble with any, or at least at more risk by any 3, 4, 6, and then jack through ace. So this hand is likely the best hand on the flop and could use a lot of protection, and that's always going to lead to at least wanting to induce or to introduce a little bit of raise in the spot. So I'm going to say that you guys were right in both wanting to call and raise here, but it would definitely be a spot that I'm mixing. And I know I rolled low in game, so I ended up calling, but I almost wish that I exploitatively just raised here because this bet size is not really appropriate for this board in a multi-way pot here. So. But for that reason, calling is not bad by any means. This is more exploitative than anything. King on the turn, he bets a little less than half pot. I'm going to assume that we're all still calling for this size. This card should be better for him, I suppose, than it is for us. But that being said, I'm still floating literally every single King X combo with spades, diamonds, and clubs. So it's not necessarily like so much better for his range. The king is definitely going to hit us as well as us still having pocket sevens, pocket fives, pocket twos. So yeah, definitely an easy call here on the turn. And then on the river, we face this like 37 to 40% pottish bet. So what are you guys doing here on the river? I don't know how many of you were watching the stream here either, or remember what I was saying here, but I absolutely remember the spot quite a bit. So yeah, what are you guys doing versus this bet size on the river? Joe's calling because his line makes no sense to me, but I'm a station. I can't fault you for that, Joe. I'm raiding that boat with you as well. Found a Flood I was watching, but also 8 to 12 tables, so don't remember. Yeah, can't fault you for that, Found a Flood. Hughes calling. Slammer is raising to 70K. Are you raising as a bluff or for value? Charlie says he was chasing for the 4 straight. Found a Flood's calling. DMC says if I flat flop, I'm calling turn and river on this runout. Okay. Slammer's raising for value. I would definitely say this is a bit too thin for value. He can easily have a king, and I don't necessarily see us raising and getting called by a hand like ace-5, ace-7, pocket eights. So I would say that's a bit thin to be raising in this spot for sure. I think we definitely have hands that we want to raise. Like if we have a hand like even king-queen or king-jack, I could get behind a raise, but I think pocket tens is probably a bit too light. Okay, what are you doing here, Pete?
Oh, beat value. And whenever you can beat value versus bet the small, you have to call.
Yeah, and that is literally what it came down to. Now, it does suck because usually, and I'm not saying his size is necessarily bad. It's probably fine as the out of position player here. But the main thing that it came to is, one, I think he can be value betting a hand like, let's say, ace-7, pocket eights, pocket nines, to get a call if I have a hand like 7-6, ace-5, ace-4, even like, I don't know if I call 2 streets of pocket threes, but the point is, like, he can definitely, for this size, he can value bet lighter than just a king here. Like I said, he can even value bet pocket eights and pocket nines to get me to call with a hand like ace-7, 7-6, ace-5, pocket sixes, all these hands that are going to be in a tough spot that he can get value from here. So I think the main thing that we came down to is that we do beat value and we have to call. But also, like, look at the pot odds that we're getting here. We can still, like, for this bet size, we basically have to still be defending around 80% of our range here. Now, I don't necessarily think anybody, like, bets, like bluffs as much as they should. So maybe we can kind of reduce this to maybe defending, like, 70% of our range instead of 80. But this hand is still definitely, like, way too strong for us to ever consider folding in this spot. So it's kind of gross. And like I said, I think for the size, like, people don't really, like, bluff that much. But for the price we're getting, we only have to be right here 1 out of every 5 times. So for that reason, and, like, the main reason, like Pete was saying, we do beat value in the spot. So we absolutely have to call here. And he wakes up with a hand like ace-king, which is exactly what I was saying on the flop. Like, for one, his bet size didn't make any sense, which kind of let me know that he's probably not very in tune to the spot. And for two, he's using a hand that probably not very appropriate for c-betting on a board like this. I think I said I could even maybe, like, slightly get behind it if he has, like, ace-king suited with some sort of backdoor, because I'm still going to be calling with, like, ace-3, ace-4. I'm going to have some, like, ace-10 of spades that I'm going to have to float here. So he does get value from some weaker ace-x's here. But this specific combo doesn't really make a ton of sense. So this spot kind of tilted me a little bit. Not that I called and he had, you know, better, but just the fact that I didn't like exploitably raise on the flop where I wanted to, because I saw an inappropriate bet size, and that he was also, like, betting a hand on the flop he probably shouldn't be betting very much. But yeah, as the way the hand played out, I think it's probably fine. Just a bit tilting to get this run out, but, you know, it is what it is. On to the next one. Pretty standard here. What are we doing on this flop? We are about 25 bigs effective, hijack versus big blind. Yeah, that's the exact thing I said that's a move. I saved chips by not 3-betting, because I definitely would have got stacked. Absolutely. Joe's betting a third with jack of hearts, 2/3 without, so he's using 2 different sizes. Okay. Rhodesian's betting small. Yep, Fountain Flood agrees with Joe, as is Hugh. DMC is betting small as well. Slammer's betting 40%. All right, Pedro.
Probably lean more towards at least half pot, closer to 2/3. But at 25 bigs, it's sort of hard to make a mistake on this.
Right. So I think the bottom line. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say anywhere between 1/3 and 2/3, I'm sure is, like, basically showing the same EV. So probably doesn't really matter too much, and maybe based on player tendencies or whatever, you can adjust accordingly or just roll.
Right. So I think Odin's gonna tell us that we can definitely mix with this combo, but I think with what Joe said, like, we can kind of, like, default use this as a strategy as humans, because, you know, we're humans, we don't mix like you know, poker software does. So I think he made a pretty good point here. Like, with the jack of hearts, we don't necessarily need to be betting so big for, you know, like, value and quote unquote protection, because we do have a little bit of backup equity in case we do get into a tricky spot here with the jack of hearts. We also block worse hands and draws that are going to call, like the jack of hearts pretty specifically blocks a big part of his, like, draw, like his draws that he's going to continue with. So both with us blocking potential draws from our opponent and needing less protection, I would just default go for a small size here. But with how connected, like, the 8 and the 7 are here, like, big blind's going to have a fair amount of, like, straight draws and flush draws and backdoor flush draws. So I absolutely see, like, a 2/3 pot size being introduced here as well. So like, I would specifically with, let's say if we have king jack of diamonds here, I might choose to bet 2/3, and with a heart I would definitely just default bet third pot or less. So pretty good point, I think, to make up there. And again, Odin's going to tell us we can mix with all those combos, but just in, like, as a general default, if I have a heart here and we need a little less protection, I would just default c-bet a bit smaller. So and we get check raised. What do you guys want to do here? We can call, we can 3-bet, we can 3-bet jam. He's gonna call, that's a move, calls. Slammer's calling. Joe's calling in, playing to call down. Sizing's probably fine in the spot. DMC's jamming. Fountain Flood's calling. Rhodesian calling. So, like, depending on what he has, like, he can use different sizes for different types of hands he has. Like, for hands that like need a bit more protection that he's willing to go broke with, he can use a bigger size here. But let's say he has a hand like King 8 or Pocket 7s or even a hand like 6-5 of hearts that doesn't necessarily like want to bet so big it blows him off of the pot. I think he can mix in small sizes with like really strong draws and hands that need less protection that kind of want to quote unquote induce. And then with hands, like if he has a hand like let's say he has King Jack, no heart, no backdoor spades, and there's like a lot of bad turn cards, he could use a bigger size in this spot to kind of put me in a situation where I either have to like jam or fold, and that he definitely wants to put in a little bit more pressure. So I think we'll definitely see two different check raise sizes being used here, depending on what his specific holding is. Obviously, we don't know what it is, so but I will say that he definitely can probably use two different sizes here, depending on what like the strength of his hand, how much protection he needs, and how strong his draw is. So. Yeah, no more re-entries here. Surma's calling to get him put more in as long as the next card isn't horrible. And yeah, with our hand, there's not going to be too many terrible cards for us that we can't end up just calling down, I would say. So the run-out would need to be pretty bad, I would say, for us to not be able to call this one down. What do you think, Pete?
Again, it sort of depends on what our bounty is. If you have a big bounty, then it probably just means he's like going for it more. So like just sticking the money in now would probably be like sort of a good decision, because he might just have a wider range of flush draws or whatever that he's willing to just go to town with. But I guess we don't know what that is. So.
Yeah, that could be part of it.
But yeah, I don't know. You can do both. Probably doesn't matter.
Yeah.
At the stack depth, it's probably maybe slightly too deep to shove. Like you want to keep bluffs in. Jack of Hearts is probably kind of a neutral card, because I think his Jack 10 with Jack of Hearts is always just going to want to call against the small size. So it's probably sort of a neutral card in terms of him having bluffs or not having bluffs. So yeah, I guess and then maybe if you have some check raise stats or whatever, that might suggest one thing or another, but probably just you have 15 hands on the guy, so doesn't mean anything there.
Who dis?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so the bounty point is probably a good point that I wasn't going to touch on. So I think that would probably factor in, because we can assume that maybe our opponent's going to stack off a little bit wider than they normally would, trying to play a little bit more aggressively for our bounty. But we also don't know what his hand is. If we can see he has a hand that he's going to stack off with, obviously we would want to do that. So yeah, we might be able to assume that he might stack off a little bit wider. So we can take that into account. But what I'm thinking here pretty much kind of goes back to what I was saying in the c-betting situation, when we use two different sizes. Again, I'm going to assume his really strong draws are going to be anything like Jack 9 of Hearts, Jack 10 of Hearts, even Jack 7 of Hearts that might play his hand like this. So we do block a lot of the strong draws that he's going to check raise and stack off with here. And also our hand does need less protection. So I'd be a little bit willing to quote unquote slow play this type of hand. And then if we have a hand again with King Jack of Diamonds where we don't block flush draws that might end up stacking off here, or some backdoor spades that are going to be check raise bluffing here, maybe we can fast play those hands because they both need more protection, and also they unblock some more draws that our opponent might end up stacking off with. So again, I think the Jack of Hearts here is pretty relevant, both because we need less protection on future runouts, and it kind of takes away some of the draws that he's going to check raise and stack off with. So I just pure called in this spot and would definitely consider 3-bet jamming with hands that need a bit more protection. And not a great turn for our hand, but okay for our range here. What do we want to do here on the turn? Yeah, Joe, he should be check raising some weaker kings. Okay, Joe's checking the turn. Slammer's betting 17K. Yeah, this is not simple. I actually wouldn't mind checking this one out in Odin. So maybe we'll take a peek at this one at the end. Slammer says bet 1 BB. Sounds like an Odin crusher to me. Hugh says all in. Rhodesian's checking behind. Charlie says check feel is bet size. Joe says betting turn small might help you control river action with a vulnerable hand. Yep, that's a consideration as well. Final Flood's mostly checking. Bet 1 BB and get the double check raise from his draws. Yeah, that would be gangster. That's the move. No, I don't think we're necessarily trying to get a hand like King Queen to fold here. But yeah, I agree with that. What do you think, Pete?
I would block, but a little bit more than one big blind. He shouldn't have a lot of 8x in his range. He should still have weaker King X, and everything else is like still probably going to have some equity on this board. So we're going to want to deny that equity by betting at least like, I don't know, a quarter. Something small with the intention of checking back, but probably more than one big blind.
Like something like quarter pot, third pot, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere 20-25%.
So, in general, and like I said, I haven't ran this hand, but I'm going to assume that Odin's going to want big blind checking a very high frequency. This card is going to be much better for us than it is for our opponent, and that's going to usually equate to big blind using a pretty high frequency check on the turn. Mainly because it is better for us. So I probably rolled here. I honestly can't remember in game. Maybe I just pure checked because we do block the flush draws that might end up calling us here as well. So there's less draws he's going to end up calling, so less worse hands that are going to continue here. And also he's still going to be checking back some, let's say, what do we start the hand with? 25 big. So he shouldn't really have pocket 8s, pocket 7s, but he can still have A7, King 7, King 8, 8-7. He can even check raise some, like, let's say, well, he can't have ace 5 of spades now, but he could check raise a hand like ace deuce of hearts, ace 3 of hearts. So even though the card is better for us, that doesn't necessarily mean that our opponent doesn't still have better hands than us or hit this ace. So I would assume that I probably rolled here in this spot. And if I'm going to bet, I would probably use a block bet size. I think we might be able to counter, since this card is so much better for us, we can probably just use a pretty high frequency bet strategy for a small size with a big portion of our range. And we can definitely still get better king highs, worse king highs to call, or king X. Like, I definitely think king 9, king 10, king 5, king 4, stuff like that, still going to call. Hand like 7x of hearts is still going to call. So yeah, we definitely get better hands to call, but I don't know if we necessarily just pure bet here. But if we did, I would block, and I think for the reasoning of basically kind of controlling the size of the pot is a pretty good start to why we want to do some block betting here. So yeah, I would probably mix here, but I'm going to assume that we might high frequency block bet here. So I ended up checking, probably rolled low. And then on the river, what are we doing here? After check on the turn. Rhodesian, he's betting for value. What size do you think? Joseph probably checked back, feels a little too thin. DMC says he's betting for 35%. Slammer says betting 17K, get an 8 or a 7 to call. Joe says just not sure, 8x or calls us or anything, so really only targeting worse king X. Okay, right for the, I think he usually has like a busted draw with this line. Yep, I mean, he's going to be bluffing with some of those busted draws. I think the fact that we have a heart means it's a little bit more likely he might have some sort of showdown, because he should be giving up with a lot of flush draws here, and then probably bluffing like more with if he has a hand like 10-6, 10-9, 7, 6-5, 6-4, stuff like that would be his better bluffs. So when he checks here and we have a heart, I think he might have a little bit more like maybe showdown value or something like that here. Might be getting a little technical. What do you think, Pete?
We do know it's going to be more than that size. Something to point out that the small bet sizing position on rivers doesn't really exist. And considering villain probably has a little in the way of ace-x, except for maybe like a small bit of like ace-high flush draws that turn to pair. And our king-jack like is still going to beat like his king-10s, king-9s, king-6s, etc. That I think we can get away with like a 2/3 pot bet here, but I don't think it's going to like be making a ton of money. But yeah, I think we can bet.
Okay. Joe says, pretty good point here too. Also getting check raise on the river is a disaster, but most players wouldn't do that as a bluff. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that, I think, was the main thing I was kind of telling myself in this spot, is that I don't think people are trapping here enough. Like, he should definitely still have a hand like ace-3 of hearts that can double check here, for sure. He can also have traps in this spot. He can have a hand like 8-7 that can definitely like check raise for value here on the river. So yeah, in theory he should have traps, but I don't think people ever do trap enough in this spot. So I think that was the main thing I came to. I think I bitched out in this spot. I'm not sure if I like that or not, and maybe I did value bet. But I think the main thing that I want to say here is that if we are going to value bet, I know a lot of you guys are saying like something around 17K or 35%. And we'll see that what Odin wants to do here. I'm really not sure what they are going to prefer, but I am almost 100% sure we're not going to see any bet size smaller than 2/3 pot here on the river if we bet. And this is something consistent that we see with Odin pretty much, because when we do get to rivers, the block bet size doesn't really exist when we're the in position player, because we're essentially saying we have a hand that's good enough to bet for value, and we're kind of like betting the strongest hands here. Once we get to the river, we're not betting anything like super thin. So in that situation, we end up using at least like a 2/3 pot size in this spot. So, and one more thing that I want to touch on, when you guys were talking about like block betting, like anything between like third pot and like 40% here, when I see somebody do this in game, I'm actually folding tighter to these smaller sizes than I am to a bigger size. Because when we do introduce those block bet sizes, they look exactly like what they are. They look like something that is not strong enough to bet like really big, that wants to get a hero call from like an 8 or a 7. So when I see a bet size like that, I'm like, okay, this is never a bluff. It's thin value. So either what I'm doing is I'm check raise bluffing whatever hand I have, or I'm just folding super tight in the spot because I assume my opponent never has a bluff here. So I would actually be more inclined to call if our opponent bets like 2/3 or bigger, because I think there's more bluffs in their range, as opposed to like a block bet size in this spot. So I do think this hand is probably strong enough to bet for the 2/3 pot size. I don't know if I bitched out here again or not. The thing that kind of sucks here is that the hands that we're mostly targeting here, since he's probably not check raising with a lot of 8x, although he should like be mixing in some check raise like 8-6, 8-5, 8-9, stuff like that, even some like 7-6, 7-9, things like that. The real hands that we're targeting are worse king x's, and obviously we block king x with the king ourselves. So I do think it's thin. I'm not sure what Odin's going to tell us here, but we'll definitely look at this one before the session ends. But I definitely think that we can probably value bet here a little bit thinly, and I did end up value betting. I'm actually happy to see this, and I think the main thing that came down to it is that we do have the jack of hearts. Since the jack of hearts are going to be hands that he's likely going to give up with, because he's mainly going to be giving up with flush draws in the spot. So when we have the jack of hearts, I'm going to assume he has something that's more like thin value-ish that he's just checking with and trying to get to showdown. So with the jack of hearts specifically, I decided to go for a value bet here, even though without it, I still think it's fine. And he ended up folding. So yeah, I think the main thing that we want to learn from this spot is that once we get to the river here, we don't really use block bet sizes here ever. Really, we don't either have a hand that's good enough to bet for value, or we just want to check it down. Like, we don't have thin value bets in this spot. And I do think that we have worse hands that are going to call us. Like some 8x is going to need to call us here. There's going to be weaker kings that are going to call us here. So yeah, I think a pretty important part to know. Now, in the games that you guys are playing, I think it's absolutely fine if you want to use these blocker bet sizes, because I don't think your opponents are going to be like, especially if you're playing like micro to small stakes, I don't think your opponents are going to sniff out these bet sizes and be able to make appropriate folds. So if you want to use these sizes to target the hands that you guys are talking about, I think it's absolutely fine. But if you're going to be playing against stronger players who are going to like sniff out these thin value bets, I think you need to be aware of that. And if you do have something like Odin, definitely look to see the sizes that they're using on the river, and you'll probably notice that anything smaller than 2/3 pot in this situation is just not going to be something that's ever going to be introduced. Again, we'll look at that later in the session here, but definitely something important to note here. I'm just happy that I did pitch out in that spot. I remember this in this tournament too. I got like pocket tens like 4 or 5 times in like a 15-minute period, so I thought that was pretty funny. What are we doing here? Oh, sorry, Joe. What hand? Real quick, I'll go back to that. What hands am I checking back? Like my strongest value hands that I'm checking back? So I'm definitely opening like King 6 suited from here. I would probably check that hand back. Obviously, like if I'm betting King Jack for value, I'll probably end up betting King 10. But again, that's getting close because I'm assuming that most of our opponent's heroes are going to call from King X, so we need to be a little bit aware of how strong our king is to be betting for value here. I also don't think people are finding like the appropriate check raises here with like 8x and 7x, so I don't think they're going to be heroing there too much. But another thing that I always say is that nobody ever folds. So that's kind of the reason why I always am looking for these thin value bets. And also people under trap in these spots too, which also allow us to value bet a little bit thinner. So I would probably say something around like King 6 suited, maybe even some King 9 suited, and then probably get to throw in value bets with like King 10, King Jack, and then obviously like some ace-x that we wind up with here. So yeah, on the flop, we open low jack. We are about 25 effective. And what do we want to do here with pocket tens? $25 big seat. Just to let you guys know. Slammer says bet 7.5. All good, the rotation. We are recording it, so if you want to catch the end of it, it should be posted here. If not later today, then sometime tomorrow. But yeah, appreciate you joining, as always. That's Moose checking back here. Joe Beagle's probably checked back. Villain is aggro, but C-bet versus passive villain. Yep. Hugh is checking. Would bet small if he does, like third pot. Yep. Fountain Flood said I would check the tens here. Trying to do more RNG, so mixing this. More likely to bet pocket nines and pocket tens. Okay. DMC says he's betting and checking half the time. I'm betting 40% pot if he bets. Slammer says I'm always feeling like I want to get that money in there. I want to have a good hand. Pot's not going to build itself. Yeah, that's true. But we're not like fist pumping if we get check raised and double barreled in this pot either. So yeah, okay. Don't want to get check raised. We have straight blockers but no clubs. Yep. True, Slammer. Absolutely. Marginal hands check back. So it sounds like you guys want to develop a checking range here. Bet a little bit more polar. What are you doing here, Pete?
Bet the club, I'm checking with the club. I'm probably betting small at least some of the time.
Okay.
Hand can face up, like, it's a board the guy can be aggressive on, and it's a hand that can't like stand too much aggression, even though you're going to be ahead of a lot of his draws. So better to check back, protect your check back range, etc., etc. There's still going to be plenty of turns you can call where you're going to have straight draws, and like you can pretty much call any turn anyway, unless you just like 2x pop bets, then I guess you just start folding. But
yeah, so this is like a spot, like, you know, I've been talking with you about this, Pete, is where I'm always trying to figure out like where having the club and where not having the club wants us to do one or the other more so. We actually had a hand in the hand discussion thread where I can't remember whose hand it was. I'm gonna check real quick, but the main point was that I basically was doing the exact reverse of what Odin wanted to do. I don't know if it was DMC's hand, I think. Either way, it's in the hand discussion thread, and I kind of talked about it a bit there. But bottom line is, I think, so what I'm telling myself here is that if we bet and we get check raise, it's pretty sweet that we don't have a club because we unblock like all the flush draws that are going to check raise us. And then if we do like c-bet with the club, I think it might be a little bit more likely that they have something strong because like a lot of those flush draws, and obviously we block straight draws here as well. So by having the 10 of clubs, I think it's more likely that villain is going to show up with. So when we do have the 10 of clubs, it's more likely that villain is going to show up with a value hand because we block so much of our opponent's semi-bluffing range. But I think what Odin tells us here is they would rather bet with the club because when they do face aggression, they have a hand that if we are behind has a little bit more equity to catch up in those cases that we are behind. So actually my logic was the complete opposite of what Odin is doing here. And again, I'm not sure. I think like what Pete said is pretty on point. Like his reasoning is pretty good here. And I think that's where I'm actually kind of learning how to use suits in these situations. So yeah, I would actually 100% agree with Pete here. It also seems like you guys want to do some mixing here, which I think may be a thing as well. This board's pretty connected, and we have a two-tone board here, so opponent's going to have flush draws and backdoor flush draws. He's going to have a lot of straight draws on this board as well. They're also going to have like all combos of Jack 8 suited, Jack 6 suited, 8-6 off, Jack 8 off, like hands that we're not going to have here. So like yes, we have like pocket jacks, pocket 8s, pocket 6s, where our opponent probably shouldn't have like 8s or jacks, but they're still going to have like the offsuit Jack 8s, Jack 6 suited that we're not going to have, 8-6 offsuits we're not going to have. So this board is going to play a little bit, I think, a bit of a mixed strategy here. Now, I think the earlier of a position that we're in, the more aggressive that we get to c-bet, because overall, we're just going to have an overall stronger range than Big Blind, who's going to be defending with a lot of crap. But I would still say on a board like this, we probably do some mixing, and I think it just defaulted c-bet here, which I still think is a fine strategy because, again, as you guys know, I'm always trying to challenge people to come up with the appropriate amount of like check calls and check raises here, and I think that nobody is defending enough, so we can kind of like default c-bet in a lot of random spots and make a little bit more money than if we were playing against something like Odin. So I do think this would be a good spot to check back, but I just ended up defaulting default c-betting here, which I think is fine as well. And then, of course, like this is the exact spot we don't want to be into. Our hand is definitely too strong to fold at this point, so we definitely have to call. 4 clubs is one of the worst cards that we could have seen. 7-5 gets there. Flush draws get there. He's going to check raise some 6-4, some 8-4. Flushes get there. And then, of course, all the Jack X that had a speed on the flop gets there as well. So he bets here on the turn. And I actually don't think this bet size is very good. I think he should be betting pretty high frequency on this turn, but I don't think a bigger size gets introduced here. Since he is supposed to be betting so much, he should be using like a small bet frequency in the spot. Also, like the board is like really wet here, so if he wants to really have me like struggle to defend like hands like this, he kind of makes the decision a bit tougher on me when he does use a smaller size. And then also when he uses a bigger size, when he has like a straight or 2 pair or a flush here, he's going to allow me to fold a bit tighter. So I don't think this bet size really accomplishes too much. I think he should be betting like around like 14, 15K, no more than that. So I have a really easy decision. This is one of the worst turn cards we could have found. So we ended up just folding here. So this would actually be a fun one to look over as well at the end of the session. So we'll keep that in mind. Would it be better to use a bigger size if you were deeper? I think bigger sizes always get to be introduced the deeper you are. But I think the main reason that, or the main thing is that this is just such a good card. Our opponent should be using a high frequency turn bet strategy here. So I would still say that mostly small sizes are introduced. Now, I think if this was like the four spades, maybe they get to use a bit more like big sizes here. But when the club completes here on the turn, that usually we end up seeing a lot of block bet sizes here in general, mainly because a flush is usually pretty invulnerable, and it wants to get me defending like these weaker hands, like some Jack X no club, maybe some straight draws that are in there. Maybe if I have a hand like I don't know, like pocket tens with the club even. So I think on the club specifically, a lot of small sizes are going to be introduced, and that will be interesting to see as well when we check out Odin. So I would say if this is the 4 of spades, maybe some bigger bet sizes get to be used. But on the 4 of clubs specifically, I think a lot of block betting ends up happening here. And that's mainly as well because not only do a lot of 2 pairs fill, flushes fill, straights fill, so just so many draws fill, that he's going to get to use a pretty aggressive turn bet strategy. And if he's just betting every single hand that he winds up with here, he probably wants to use a smaller size in general and really force like some of the tougher defense that I have to continue in the hand. So yeah, we'll move on. If we have the 10 of clubs, yeah, we probably have to call, which is kind of gross, but yeah, we probably have to call. Maybe we get some fold. I wouldn't be surprised with that bet size, but I would say we might have to call. But without it, it's probably pretty easy. Why do you want me to fold if you have a hand that got there? In terms of, yeah. Oh, you're asking in this guy's spot, like, why do you want me to fold, like, if he has a hand that got there? So I'm thinking that exploitively, he might just have a hand like Jack 8 or 6-8, something like that, that, like, is likely ahead but needs a lot of protection. But that's just him kind of, like, playing his hand. So when he bets his size, I think there's almost, like, 0 bluffs in his range. I mean, this card is bad enough anyway for him to, like, not have a hand that got there on this card. But when he bets big like this, I'm thinking that he probably doesn't have flushes, but he probably has something more like Jack 6, Jack 8, 8-6, maybe even a hand like 6-4 that ended up getting there. So yeah, I just think that he probably has us beat in the spot, and him using the bigger size just makes our life a little bit easier. Okay, we are 20 effective. I'm going to assume everybody is jamming here for 20 big, so I don't think we need to talk too much about that, especially with the bounty. I'm assuming that was a bounty call. Although I do remember seeing this call and still being a bit surprised. So I don't think my bounty was necessarily huge at this point, so we can take that to note. So this was, I remember thinking that this was a pretty wide call in the moment. Okay, I think we can call here. I don't think anybody's really going to be 3-betting this hand or folding this hand, specifically on the button. I think we can pretty much always call here. Gin flop. What are we doing here? Versus 2 checks. Joe's betting 2/3. And for what it's worth, stacks are about 36 bigs effective. Slammer's checking. Unblocking top pairs and draws. That'll be check raise. Yep, that's a good reason for betting. Q is checking. That's moves betting 3rd pot. Slammer says checking because I got 2 opponents I could put money in on the next card. Yep. Found a flood said missed it. This went, yeah, so it was an open, a call, and we defended on the button. And then it checked to us, found and flood. So yeah, we overcalled versus an open and a call. DMC, if I'm honest, I bet 3rd yet again because I c-bet that size like 90%. And yeah, you can probably get away with it too using it, again, a high frequency c-bet strategy. Nobody defends wide enough, so you can kind of get away with just like over c-betting for a smaller size. Joe says, I don't even hate going bigger than 2/3. Hands like that are going to call no matter what sizing. Yep, true. And Found and Flood's betting 3rd pot. Slammer says, against one opponent, I'd be betting. Okay. And that's a move says, I want to introduce versus villains that know I shouldn't be betting small versus 2 people on this board. Okay. Wait for a few more replies and we'll see what Pete wants to do here. All right, what do you want to do, Pete?
That's the board that's going to favor a bigger size, but when you're multi-way, your bigger size still tends to be smaller than what your bigger size is heads up. just because you're chopping equity with two hands. So whenever you bet, like, you're smaller, and yeah. And so then like some of our bluffs could just be like, honestly, probably some like random wheel exits could just like stab once. Like you're like ace five, maybe that might be too thin, but I'm trying to think what our bluffs would be. But regardless, I think half pot's probably about the right size, but 2/3 is fine. 1/3 is probably not good because both guys are still on cap, but if you bet bigger, they might still be encouraged just to check call. You may as well just start shoving the money in before the board changes, and they are going to be incentivized to fold. Or your hands collapse too, because like, even though we have bottom set, we're still vulnerable to a lot of hands. We just kind of want to start shoveling money in ASAP with such a presently nutted hand that can shift so much on turns and rivers.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll address a couple things here. I think so. In general, I at least know this. Heads up, we do very little checking with sets, specifically bottom set, mainly because we unblock like all the Jack X that's going to end up calling here and never folding. We also unblock any kind of draw, like any straight draw and flush draw on a board that's pretty wet. So I'm just going to assume that we are going to very high frequency be betting this board. I'll get to the bet size in just a second, I guess. In terms of, I think Slammer said she'd be more willing to check when we have two opponents as opposed to one. I actually would probably do the opposite because, like, when we have a hand this good, we have two different ranges that can possibly call us on a board where we unblock like all top pairs and all draws. So the likelihood of us getting called should be even higher because it's always going to be more difficult to fold when there are two players involved as opposed to one because we're playing against two different ranges here. So if I were to trap, which I probably would never do with bottom set, I would probably more likely do it against one opponent. But more often than not, there's very few like slow playing with sets, and specifically bottom set for like the reason I said, because we unblock top pair. So now in terms of what size we want to use here, I wouldn't be surprised to see in a solver if we do introduce some bigger bet sizes here, but I would also think that might be a little bit more appropriate if we were like 50 to 100 big blinds deep, where we really want to shovel in more money. But when we're only 36 effective, I think we can still get the money in easily for either 2 or 3 streets, depending on the action. So I would just default bet third pot here. So not only like does betting third pot force our opponents to defend a wider range because we're using a smaller size, but by betting smaller, we also allow them to check raise bluff with a wider range than if we had bet like half pot to 2/3. For one, we're going to allow them to fold more value hands in that spot because they're getting a worse price and they are going to need stronger hands to defend. And for two, we're not going to really make them stretch to find some check raise bluffs that they might have if we just bet third pot in this situation. And also, this hand doesn't need a ton of protection. Like, we have a set here, our hand is very invulnerable unless the run out just comes like 9-10 of hearts in this spot. So I'm not really looking to bet a size that's going to force our opponents to fold their marginal hands here. And again, like I think if we're 50 to 100 bigs deep, I think the bigger size would absolutely be a fine size to introduce. But at 36 effective, where I know we can easily get the money in for 3 streets, I think betting a smaller size would probably be my default play here. So yeah, bet small here and just get 2 folds. So pretty unexciting. But yeah, I still think some good points were introduced here in this hand anyway. So we're doing very, very little slow playing here, specifically with bottom set. Okay, going to defend here with a 9-6. And versus bet, I think we probably just have to fold here multi-way. This betting range is going to be a bit tighter when he's betting into 2 opponents as opposed to 1. Hey, Cactus, I see you're in there, but could you just mute your microphone, if you could, please? Thank you. And what are we doing versus a 3-bet here? Button versus big blind. We are about 37 bigs effective. Oh, and Cactus, so I know this is your first session in here, so if you want to join us, I'm asking everybody questions. So if you want to give your response, head to the training sessions tab and just let us know what you think in any spot that I'm asking. But if you just want to listen, that's cool too. Anytime, Joe. Glad you joined. Good luck today. I'm sure you're grinding. Appreciate you joining. So yeah, versus 3-bet, what are we doing here? That's a move is mixing depending on game flow. Slammer's folding. So this is about 7 big blinds here for what it's worth. Slammer's rip. That's a move is ripping here. DMC's folding. Q's folding. Versus Priscilla, easy rip. Can't hate that. I can't hate that. I don't know how to 4-bet bluff this hand yet. Found a flip for 7 bigs, I call. For 8 bigs, he call. Oh, fold 8 bigs. Yeah, I probably should have assumed that. That's moves calling. What are you doing here, Pete?
Oh.
Calling. Okay. So, actually a bit of a surprise here. So, okay, 40 bigs versus, so, funny enough, versus a small blind 3-bet, we are almost always V-pipping with the 6-5 suited for 40 bigs. But versus big blind, it's pure folding, like 7-6, 6-5, which is a bit surprising to see. So I'm going to assume that's mainly because the big blind is using a more polarized 3-bet strategy. So we might have to defend a little bit tighter versus big blind as opposed to versus a small blind. Now, another fact that I wanted to add in here is that these suited connectors, like suited connectors and small pocket pairs, are going to kind of play a little bit similarly. The deeper the stacks, the more these hands go up in value here. So at 40 bigs, it gets a little bit tricky. It's not necessarily like a fist pump call here. The main thing that had me calling is that I think the size was a bit on the small side, and I'm just like, I mean, I'm always kind of overvaluing my post-flop plays, so I don't mind like calling here, even though I think it's close, and this should be a relatively tight 3-betting range here, because I think this is one of the most under-bluff spots in poker, the big blind 3-betting range. So I think the main thing was that the size being what it was made me flick it in here. So I was kind of okay with that, but it is pretty interesting to note that versus a small blind 3-bet, where basically 100% V-pipping here, but versus big blind, we are introducing some fold, and I think that's mainly because of the tighter 3-betting range. And once again, these hands are going to play a lot better when you're like 60 to 100 big blinds deep, as opposed to be like sub 40 here. So even if we were like 25 to 30 bigs, I think I would just pure fold here. But at 40, I thought it was still probably okay, and I'm still not going to beat myself up too much about it. And even versus a small bet here, and I'm still like have this in my mind that this is probably going to be a range that's tighter than it should be. We do have like some okay backdoors, but like nothing great here, so I just ended up folding. I think it's probably fine. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some defend here, but again, like random opponents are going to be much tighter in this position than Odin's ever going to be. So I think we can just default defend a little bit tighter than even Odin would suggest here. But even that, I still think it's probably a fold. So ace 5. So actually, we can look at the 4-bet bluffing range if you guys want to do that. So essentially, the bluffs are coming from like king jack suited, king queen offsuit. I guess we can consider pocket 5s, pocket 4s bluffs. But you can see most of the suited ace x's that aren't good enough to call or that aren't good enough to jam are just calling. And then most of the 4-bets are coming from our ace x's that are good enough to jam. Again, we are always going to see that our solvers like mainly going to be jamming with the offsuit varieties here, because these hands, like, not only are these hands good enough to play for stacks, but when we call, they also like flop a lot worse than a lot of these suited combos do. So that's why you see these hands like the ace 10 offsuit pure jamming here, but the ace 10 suited is basically pure calling in this spot. So I guess the majority of our bluffs are coming from like king queen offsuit, king jack suited, and then like 6s through 4s basically. So pretty interesting too. I wouldn't be surprised to see like some 4-bet jam from ace 5, ace 4. but it looks like they are calling in this spot. So, yeah, always interesting to see how we're bluffing in this spot too. Yep, that's true, Fountain Flood. Pocket tens once again. All right, we are about 30 bigs effective. What are we doing here? Hijack versus big blind. $30 bigs effective. Hijack versus big blind. What are we doing? Huge checking. Slammer is betting 40%. Found him flood for 30 bigs. He's betting third pot. Yeah, it's not that big of a league. Like, I wouldn't beat yourself up about that. It's just important to note, like, which hands play well at certain stack sizes, because we can't just play every single hand the exact same depending on what our stack sizes are, for sure. So that's a pretty important feature to know if you're going to be playing tournament poker, because obviously we deal in all kinds of different stack sizes, and every hand doesn't play, you know, the same in every different stack size that we end up having. DMC says, I feel like I shouldn't answer these flop bet spots because I had still third pot c-bet. In all honesty, in most situations, it's never really going to be a mistake to third pot c-bet in just about any spot. It just might not be the most optimal, but I don't think there's very many boards where you're like specifically losing money by pure third pot c-betting in most spots. It might just not be the most optimal or the bet size that's always making the most money. Especially when you're playing against opponents who like under defend as well. Like, I don't think it's ever going to be a mistake to like just default third pot bet in a lot of spots. All right, what are you doing here, Pete?
How deep are we? We're like 25 deep, 30 deep.
30.
Don't mind the dog in the background.
Never do.
On this board where he's going to have a lot of gutters that are going to want to have to continue, and even though it's the doogie board, I think you still probably get some bigger sizing on this because you want to charge all the wheel aces, the 5-6s, the 8-6s, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you want to actually just start shoveling money in now. I think, and it's going to be a board where you're going to want to be checking more too, so you're going to be more polarized with your betting strategies. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's slightly dry enough where you can get away with the small bet, and especially against population, where we've said this a few times now, where they're not check raising aggressively enough. Mm-hmm. You can get away with more small bets on these sorts of boards. Okay. But I think the GTO is going to want to favor a slightly bigger size.
Are you checking Odin right now, you cheater?
No.
Oh, you better not be. Because I might want to actually just check this flop later on too, when we do our couple hands at the end of the session, just because I'm curious what they're going to say here. I'll let you finish your point though.
No further point other than that I'm sitting low in my chair and paying half attention to a dog, so I can't be doing Odin.
All right, all good. So I think this is kind of interesting because I don't know if we introduce check here again. The earlier of a position that we open from, I think the more aggressive we get to be on most boards in general. And in this position, I don't think our opponent ever has a hand like pocket sevens here. I think sevens probably plays for stacks at 30 bigs, hijack versus big blind. I could be wrong. But our opponent should have like deuce 4, 7-4, maybe some 7 deuce suited. We're not going to have those hands, of course. But we're also like at an overpair advantage here. So I also don't think our opponent's calling like 7-4 offsuit, 7 deuce offsuit. So he doesn't necessarily like smash his board or anything, but he's gonna have like a lot of 7x, a lot of 4x, some suited deuce x, ace 3s, ace 5s, like a lot of straight draws here. So I think 2 sizes probably get to be introduced. Now I think like if we're around like 50 to 100 bigs, we might get to introduce a little more of a higher frequency check or a higher check frequency. But at 30 bigs, we might get to be a little bit more aggressive overall because it's kind of easier for us to stack off with certain hands that might want to pot control when stacks are a bit deeper. So I'm gonna assume we still get a pretty aggressive c-bet strategy here overall. Now, in terms of what size we want to use, I think we definitely get to use two sizes here. I think the third pot size is absolutely going to be fine on this board, and I also think we probably get to introduce some bigger sizes, even up to like 80% to pot. Now, I haven't really put that into my game as of yet. So my natural big size when I'm like sub 40 bigs is usually 2/3. So I'm going to use 2/3 with a couple different parts of my range. I'm going to use 2/3 with hands like this one specifically that is likely the nuts now, but its value can drastically change on a lot of different turn cards. Obviously, like a jack through an ace is going to change our value. Any 7, any 4, any deuce, any 3, any 5, any 6 can all either make two pairs or straights for our opponent. And then also when we bet bigger, like not only do we protect more and kind of force him to not be able to VPIP as aggressively, but he's going to end up shoveling in more money with some kind of uncomfortable hands here, like some king fours, some 7/6s. So like I definitely think it's good to have some big bet sizes with hands like this that are strong enough to bet and like bet big and stack off, and that also need a lot of protection. Now on the flip side, let's say if I have a hand like pocket sixes or an ace four, like something that like can definitely be the best hand, but doesn't necessarily want to put in a lot of money. I would be introducing a small size with those. Like if we have a hand like 7/6 suited, 8/7 suited, ace deuce, ace four, a mix with like some ace three, ace five here, pocket fives, pocket sixes, hands that can probably c-bet at some frequency, but don't necessarily want to be putting in a ton of money because they're just not strong enough overall to do it. So with those hands, I would use a small size. And then on the flip side, if I have a hand like pocket sevens, pocket fours, pocket aces, pocket kings, hands that are very strong and that need very little protection as well. So those would be the hands where I would choose to introduce a small size with. Now I know Odin's probably going to tell us that we get to vary a lot, but it's still good to kind of have like a default, like what do I want to do with certain hands, certain hand classes that I have on boards like this. So mainly I want to be using the big size with hands that are likely really strong, but also need a lot of protection. And then on the flip side, use smaller sizes with hands that are like good enough to value bet sometimes, but don't want to shovel in a lot of money. And then also hands that are so strong that they need very little protection. So I went 2/3 here, and we got a call. And what do you guys want to do on this turn? After betting 2/3 pot on the flop, we get the king of spades on the turn. Slammer's block betting. DMC says he's betting half pot to 2/3. Okay. Hughes betting 2/3. Found a flood similar to DMC. If you bet the smaller one, it's exactly like what you said. Nutted hands that don't need much protection, but smaller too. Yep. Oh, thanks. Every raise you vomit. Yep, that's absolutely true. I agree with that. But we also can't just assume our opponent's going to raise because a card like looks a bit scary for our hand. So yeah, Pete, throw in your 2 cents, and I'll go from there.
Yeah, that's small. You can block again, especially on these Badoogie boards, so it's going to make your bluffs a lot more efficient too, because all his backdoor flush draw hands that called flop are going to have automatic folds on the turn, so you're just going to get to bet small a lot with a lot of your range.
So bottom line is, so if you're blocking with this hand, like what are you doing with the majority of your range that gets here? Like, are you betting pretty aggressively with most of your hands here, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could just have like a lot of random bluffs with like your, like, if you had like 8-9 of spades, for instance, like you could like get away with a real cheap bluff because you don't you don't have a lot of equity, so you don't really want to bet very big. But you also unblock all of his backdoor flush draws, and it's just other big card hands that are just going to be forced to fold.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you can be very aggressive for like a small size in here and like be very efficient with like producing folds.
And that's mainly because this card should be better for us than it should our opponent. Now, of course, it looks like a scary card, but overall, like all the Broadway cards are going to be better for our range than it is for our opponents. So just like if you're in like the big blind shoes right now, and you have 7-6, or you have 4-5, or you have ace deuce, or you have 6-5, like all these hands, like you're kind of puking right now because you're like, shit, this card's like pretty good for him. This kind of sucks. So I think overall, and we can actually go over this one too. This will probably be the last hand, and then we'll check out some stuff in Odin. But I think overall, this card is going to be very good for our range. So I'm going to assume we're going to use a pretty high frequency double barrel strategy here. Now it might be a little different because we did bet 2/3 on the flop, so our range is going to be a little bit more polarized, and our opponent's like check calling range is also going to be stronger because they're calling versus a bigger bet. So we might not get as aggressive c-bet strategy here on the turn as I may think, but we'll definitely look into it. But the bottom line is that this card overall is going to be better for us. We're still ahead of like all ace deuce, all 7-6, all 4-5s. We unblock all the straight draws he's going to have. So I'm just assuming with this hand, not only like do we unblock draws, but he's also going to have worse hands that are going to need to defend versus a turn bet here. And I'm just thinking if I have the appropriate amount of bluffs, and I'm going to have plenty of them in this spot, then we definitely need to be value betting stronger than just like King X and like sets in this spot. And I definitely think a hand like Pocket Tens is absolutely strong enough to double barrel here. I would actually be a little bit more inclined to, not just because of its hand strength, but with a hand like Pocket Eights, we kind of block hands like 8-6 and 8-5 that we get to probably just automatically fold on the turn. So I might be a little bit more likely to check a hand like that back, or maybe just like block bet in that spot, because we do block some of their auto folding range on the turn. So yeah, anyway, I did end up betting here. I think I bet half pot, which I think is probably fine. I think where I get like really curious is what size we want to use and how aggressively we get to bet this turn. So, but I think the main thing is that this hand is absolutely strong enough to double barrel here on the turn. And I also think like if we get check raised in this spot, there's like no flush draws in this situation here. So if people are going to find bluffs, I think they'll need to do it with hands like 6-5, ace-5, ace-3. And I'm just never assuming that our opponents are going to find like those really tough bluff spots. So essentially what I'm telling myself is I'm going to bet here, and then I'm just going to have the easiest fold ever if our opponent ends up check jamming here, and I'm not even going to feel upset about it. So I think he really, like if he check jams, he basically tells us that he always has the best hand, because it's so hard to find like semi-bluffs in this spot. So people like have a hard time like semi-bluffing in general, but on a rainbow board like this, I think it's going to be even tougher. So like I think we can just exploitively bet here, definitely get worse hands to call us, definitely get protection from straight draws, and we don't let a hand like 4-5 see a free turn, or 2-3 see a free turn or a river. So yeah, I think I'm just like almost like full frequency betting here on the turn, and just easily folding if we get check jammed on. So yeah, interesting spot. So yeah, I think we'll stop it here, at least with the review, and we'll check out some hands. If you guys want, we can just check this one up real quick, since we have this one queued right now. So 30 bigs, and I'll pull Odin over here in just a sec. I'm just gonna run this in real quick. We are hijack versus big blind, deuce of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 4 of hearts. So Poker Goat itself making an appearance here. Yeah, I'll, we are recording it too, Found and Flood, so I'll be able to at least go back and that. Oh, it's also going to be hard to be like, oh, we stopped at Pocket Tens. But I don't know if you were just trolling there or not, but we saw Pocket Tens like 7 times this session, so yeah, sorry, I'm slow, man. Good one. All right, so our opponent checks, and I'm going to assume we get to introduce 2 different bet sizes here. So the most common bet size here is 2/3 pot, betting about 20% of the time. And then right behind that, it looks like the 1BB size is being used about 16%. And then the 2/3 and 90% pot sizes are being used about 14% of the time as well. So you can see that we're definitely, yeah, nice, Found and Flood. Leaving the high one. Yeah, so we're using two different bet sizes here. And again, so this is kind of interesting that we do see some traps here with sets in this spot, mainly like with the pocket sevens because they block so much of our opponent's continue range. Obviously, pocket fours is doing a lot more betting in this spot. And what I do want to point out here is that we can see that pocket tens is using a lot more of the big bet strategy because this is a hand that is likely ahead. Even like nines and eights, you can see it using like a very big bet size, and that's because it's likely to be the best hand and also needs a ton of protection. Now you see with aces and kings, we see a lot of like 1BB to third pot bet sizes being used in this spot. So I'm happy to see that this I was at least consistent when it came to that. Also, the 7Xs are using very big sizes here as well, and then they're starting to introduce some smaller sizes with the 8-7 and the 7-6 because they are worth a little bit less. So yeah, kind of an interesting spot. Obviously, pocket tens, we want to be using a variety of sizes. It looks like mostly anything from third pot to 90%. So we'll just use 2/3. Opponent calls. Turn was. Just make this a bit smaller now. Turn was the king of spades. Should have known that because it was a rainbow turn card. Fucking knee slapper, bub. So on the turn, and what I'm really interested to see, yeah, so we're only checking 20% of the time with our entire range here. So this basically says that this card is so much better for us than it is for our opponent. And actually, pocket tens is full frequency betting on the turn. Even nines and eights is full frequency betting. Same can go with the majority of our 7X. Interesting enough, like king 7 is doing a bit of slow play here, which I definitely would not expect. You can see aces and kings really aren't even in here because they never bet for the 2/3 pot size. Kind of interesting to see queens checking here, but I think the main reason we see a little bit of check from queens is because it needs very little protection on rivers and can just like easily call just about every single river here. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that we want to take from this is that once we get to the turn here, we're using a very aggressive turn betting strategy. And actually, there's no third pot being introduced here. I actually wouldn't have been surprised to see a little bit of third pot to half pot be introduced in the spot, mainly because of how good this card is for us. But yeah, I guess it's just full frequency betting for 2/3 here, and that's the only size that's being used in the spot. And I think you can take like.
Use a sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say when you use a smaller size on the flop and see what turn sizes it uses.
Yeah.
See if it's always still big if you use a small size on the flop.
Yeah, I was actually going to go to that as well, actually. So we'll double check that. But I think the main thing that we want to see from here is that we're not necessarily playing our hand and that this like isn't the greatest card for our hand, but we need to note that this card is just a very good card for our range. So we essentially counter that by betting a very big portion of our range that gets to this turn card here. Like the only real hands that are checking are like ace queen, ace jack, things that can still like have a little bit of showdown here, and then just like everything else in between is either betting as a bluff or for value here. So this is us playing our range here in general and us noting that this card is so good for us. Now we'll go back to what Pete was saying. If we do introduce a smaller bet size and our opponent is going to be defending with a wider range, we'll see if we get to introduce some smaller sizes here on the turn. So check. And nope, just still pure, at least 2/3 or bigger here on the turn. And it looks like it's splitting between 2/3 and about 90% pot. So yeah, pretty interesting to see that. I actually thought myself that we might get to introduce some block or half pot, mainly because this card is so good for us. We just get to use a high frequency like bet strategy, and obviously like some hands are like weak enough where I think that third pot or half pot might be introduced. But no, Odin's actually telling us that we can't do that. Also interesting to see that we're checking like 45% of the time here now, and the main reason for that is because when we bet small, we're going to be betting a wider range of hands, so like a lot weaker of a range. And when we bet 2/3, we're mainly betting like our strongest hands and our strongest draws. So that's why when we get to the turn, we end up double barreling a little bit more because we have less crap in our range. We have just like more strong hands and strong draws. So that's why you see a little bit more check being introduced here on the turn, as opposed like when we bet 1/3 on the flop as opposed to 2/3. So yeah, interesting stuff there. Let's check out some other spots that we had. Wasn't 9-6 wasn't interesting. That was all in. what was the tens? Okay, so this was an interesting one as well that I wanted to check out. That one pocket tens hand that we had. So this is low jack big blind, 6 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, jack of clubs, and I think we bet quarter pot, faced 3x check raise and called. So we'll keep that in mind. All right. So I think, again, I think where it gets interesting is if we actually get to introduce like a fair amount of check here. I would assume, again, like the shorter stacks are, and the earlier the position we're in, we're going to be able to use a more aggressive c-bet strategy. But since this board is like kind of neutral to both players, like I think both players will have the same amount of like stronger hands on this board. We might introduce a little bit more checking than we should. I'm going to be really interested to see what we want to do with a hand like pocket tens, and I'm not going to be surprised if we want to bet the clubs more than the spades. So yeah, even on a board this wet where our opponent has like a fair amount of strong hands as well, you can see that when stacks get shorter and we start introducing a later position where we're going to have a stronger overall range, we're essentially going to use a more aggressive c-bet strategy. Now, if we were like 50 to 100 bigs deep here, I think there would be a lot more check being introduced here. So yeah, and I guess we can look. So yeah, again, the clubs are betting a lot more high frequency than the diamonds. And that goes back to the spot that I was talking about in the hand discussion thread, and that what Pete was talking about. Odin definitely wants to bet a little bit more with tens, not so much because it blocks like I thought, like we might want to bet a little bit more without the club because we unblock our opponent's check raise bluffs or semi bluffs. This just assumes that we have more equity. Like if we are a little bit behind on further like on turns or rivers. So yeah, we're using a variety of different sizes here. It looks like anything between 1 big blind and like 80% pot is being introduced here. Pocket tens, I would assume, is mainly going to be high frequency, like small bet size, because it really isn't strong enough to be betting for like bigger sizes. But there is a little bit of 2/3 pot in here, which might kind of be okay. It might have a little bit of value from just folding out, like even a hand like 5-4 here, a hand like 7-4, things like that. It wouldn't be like the worst result to get a fold here. But either way, I think we bet something closer to 1 BB here, so that's what we'll do. And let's get a check raise in here. And our hand pure continues. And this is where it's going to be interesting here too on the 4 of clubs. Because we're going to see how aggressive our opponent is double barreling on this card that fills in straights and flushes. So I'm going to assume it's going to be a pretty high frequency like block bet strategy here. And yeah, so this is how good this card is for our opponent. He's checking 6.5% of the time. So essentially he's betting his entire range on this card because this card is so good for him. So he's even betting hands like, let's say, okay, so the 8-7 gets in here as a check raise sometime. He's pure betting 8-7 on the turn here. A hand like, let's say, where's the 6-5? That's going to be in here. Hand like 6-5. Even 6-5, no club, is pure betting on the turn here. And that's not necessarily because of the hand strength here, but it's because of how good this turn card is for the big blind. Like a lot of straight draws got there. 6-4 got there. 8-4 I'm sure should be in there a little bit. Where am I finding 8-4 is in there as well. So all these hands that he's check raising like as like either like a mergey semi bluff hand, like an 8-4 or a 6-4, those get there. The flushes get there, straights get there. So this card is just so good for our opponent's range that they're just betting literally every single hand in their range. I didn't necessarily think they would be betting their entire range, but they are betting the majority of their range here. And the most high frequency size is the block bet size here for third pot here. It's betting 70% of the time. And then the hands that essentially are good enough to play for stacks and need a ton of protection are using the 1.5x overbet size. I'm kind of curious with the ace-jack. I would assume the ones without the clubs are mainly going to be jamming. Yeah, so the ones without clubs are mainly jamming here because they're strong enough to play for stacks, but also need a ton of protection. So you can see that the ace-jack with the ace of clubs is just pure betting for the block bet size because it's just like has so much equity and doesn't really want to blast off like hands like I have exactly in my range here, like pocket 10. So Essentially, the half pot size does not exist, and that they just want to be either like ripping here with hands that are good enough to play for stacks that need a ton of protection, or they're just block betting everything that either is strong enough to keep betting that doesn't need a lot of protection, or hands like the 5-4 off that are just gonna like keep betting here. I would assume like 5-4 with a club wants to bet big. Yeah. So very interesting to note here. This is another spot again where this card is just so much better for one player's range as opposed to the other. You just see a super high frequency bet strategy, and they're not really looking like, I would assume most people are going to be like in a tough spot where they have a hand like 5-4, maybe they'll check a little bit more here. Hand like 8-7, maybe they check a little bit. A hand like 7-6 like doesn't look great, but the bottom line is here that this card is so good for our opponent that they want to use a pretty high frequency double barrel strategy. So I think that was a really interesting hand, and something that you guys want to know for sure if you're not doing that in your own game. I don't think we really need to cover the King Jack. So the pocket tens, we could run this as a heads up pot, but I don't think that was particularly interesting as well. I think there was at least one more spot that was a bit more interesting than that. That might have been in the first one that we looked at. I guess we can end with the A7 here. I think we did say that we might do a little bit of mixing here. Either that, or we can look at the pocket tens hand here. If you guys want to do that, I guess let me know. Would you guys rather see the pocket tens versus the ace king? We could run that as a heads up pot rather than a multi-way, or we could check out what our betting frequencies want to be with the A7 here. A7, A7, okay, A7, all right, A7 wins it. So let's see, we are about 20 effective. This looks like MP versus button. 20 BB. We got the 3-9, 3 of spades, 9 of diamonds, jack of hearts. Just curious on the turn here. So he bets half pot. 9 of hearts, 9 of clubs on the river. We check it down. Okay. I guess I should have asked what you think our opponent should be doing in this spot. And again, these are the spots that I'm pretty understudied overall, so I'm always interested to see pots where the pre-flop opener is playing a pot out of position as opposed to like he opens in MP and the big blind defends because these outputs are going to be a lot different. So it's always interesting to see how aggressive our opponent is being on these boards. Now, our opponent is betting quite aggressively as the out-of-position player. I think more often than not, opponents should be introducing more of a high-frequency check strategy out of position. Obviously, it's tougher to play out of position, so you need to play more cautiously overall. But at smaller stack sizes, I see a lot more high-frequency c-betting being used. And especially the earlier of a position our opponent is opening from, the stronger their range is going to be. And therefore, they can kind of exploitively just use a higher frequency c-bet strategy because their range is so strong, especially at 20 big blinds. So pretty curious, always curious to see what these outputs look like from the pre-flop opener's range when they're out of position. They are betting 68% of the time, which is kind of crazy here. And actually, Pocket Kings is essentially full frequency betting, which I would definitely roll in his shoes. Shocker. But yeah, this is essentially saying that his range is so strong, and he unblocks like Jack X. I mean, that's not King Jack specifically. So he just wants to shovel in money as soon as possible. So we're gonna play a check here anyway, and go to what our A7 wants to be doing here. And yeah, A7 is doing a bit of mixing here, mainly betting for a third pot if they are betting. And I think again, it's for the reasons we pointed out. We definitely put some pressure on some hands that are ahead of us. So if we can ever make better hands fold, that's always going to be a reason for us to bet. But also our hand has enough equity where we can just check and play on future streets. So this is why we see a little bit of mixing here. So we check. Turn was the 3 of diamonds. And our opponent bet half pot. I'm going to assume that our opponent's going to be betting mainly for the bigger size here. Yeah, so third pot doesn't really exist, or half pot doesn't really exist, but this is the closest to it. So he bets 2/3, and I think we just pure call here if I had to guess. Yep, A7 is pure calling, no need to raise. Would be kind of curious to see where the raising range is coming from. It looks like these super strong combo draws here, like Queen 10 suited. Funny enough, 10-8 suited is just basically full frequency calling, and Queen 10 is playing a bit more aggressively. Where the bluffs are coming from, I would assume it would be like King Queen with a diamond here. Actually, like even King, this is kind of interesting. So essentially every King Queen combo is kind of mixing in a little bit of raise and a little bit of fold here too. So yeah, a bit interesting here. I don't think a lot of players are finding the raise with King Queen here specifically. Funny enough, like Ace 3 is just pure calling here. I figure if we have raises, like part of that range would be with like a 3 here, which we have very little of. So maybe that's why we don't have any raise, because we essentially never have any 3x here. Also, funny enough, it looks like we are doing a bit of checking here with Jack 9 suited, which I don't know about you guys, but I'm probably pretty high frequency like betting with a hand this strong. Now that might also be because stacks are only 20 bigs effective here. So on a really dry board, we can still easily get the chips in here and also allow our opponent to bet with a bit worse. And that might also come because our opponent should be using a pretty high frequency c-bet strategy here. So we might end up checking a little bit more high frequency than we should, or a little bit stronger than we should here anyway. So anyway, we'll go 3 of diamonds. Our opponent bet, we'll say 2/3. And we called. And river was the 9 of something. I don't think it really matters too much. Say 9 of clubs. And our opponent checks, which I'm assuming they probably never should do. Actually, wow. So, okay. So funny enough, I think earlier I did say I might mix here, but just judging from the sim here, I would just assume that they're going to try to get the money in. Now, I guess they want to trap here so much because, for one, this 9 probably is like decent for our range. Our play is pretty indicative of a 9 as well. We're probably mainly checking back flop with 9x in this spot. So I think that's why we see such a high frequency check in this situation. They are essentially pure, well, they're kind of mixing it with their 9x, like some 10-9s mixing here, Queen 9, King 9, 9-8s pure betting here. So funny enough, like the worst 9 is betting here more often than the like better 9s here. So, but either way, they're doing a lot of checking here. They're checking over 3/4 of their range here. That's basically saying because the 9 is probably a lot better for my range than it is for our opponents. So it's good that they have some traps here as well. So we check. Our hand is basically going to pure check here. But yeah, you can see hands like Queen 10 needs to basically pure bluff. I would say Queen 10 of diamonds probably pure gives up here. Yeah, so Queen 10 of diamonds pure gives up. Having diamonds is bad. But all these other combos definitely want to mix some bluff. Hand like 10-8 is pure bluffing here. 8-7 is pure bluffing. 7-6 pure bluffing. Even 7-6 of diamonds. Usually, like diamonds are pure give ups for the most part, but we do see a lot of bluffing from the lower diamond combos, mainly because they unblock like higher flush draws that are gonna end up just giving up in these spots. So yeah, and also because its overall hand strength is so weak. 6-5 of diamonds would also be the same. So when they check some strong hands, they allow us to bluff in spots like this. So there's definitely some merit to checking back, some value here to allow us to bluff, and also kind of well, I guess they're just playing for stacks here for betting here anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So why is it betting the weak 9s? Which ones on the what street? I should say, I guess. Just in general on the river. So we can go back to that. So really, there's not a whole lot of 9x here anyway. It doesn't look like. I guess because they're supposed to be betting a lot of their 9x on the flop. So they just don't have a lot of 9x that gets here. So I think the sim is just going to be a little weird here overall on the turn. So yeah, on the river, it doesn't really get here with 9x like this very much. So that's why you don't see it. This might be one of those things we don't really have to look into very much. I think. So I would assume that we would probably check this back a little bit more because hands like 8-7 are going to need to bluff here. So with the 9-8, they kind of block that. So I'm a bit perplexed as to why we want to be betting a little bit more high frequency with that. Now, I would be betting more high frequency with a hand like Ace-9 here because we, let me think here real quick. So with the Ace-9, maybe we want to be checking here a little bit more because we unblock Ace-X's that are going to be checking back here. So I'm kind of okay with the check back with Ace-9. because in our shoes, if we have ace X without any pair, obviously, we're just going to check back. So I would understand the checking from here. And more high frequency betting coming from the king X and the queen X with the 9X, the king 9 and the queen 9 here. So I guess like some king queens in our shoes should be checking back here too. So let me check this real quick. Yeah, if we have king queen, we're pure checking back. So it essentially wants to check back the 9X with hands that we're just trying to show down here. So we're showing down with king queen and ace X here. So that's why we want to see slow plays with this. But we're having to bluff like the queen 10s here. We're having to bluff with the 9-8s here. So I guess that's why they want to be betting a little bit more when they have those hands. So yeah, a bit complex here. I don't think you should look too much into it, but it's still kind of important to maybe identify, why Odin's doing what it's doing. Sometimes it's just going to be like really head scratching, but also some of it does get a little bit nitpicky. So in this spot, it's just a bit off because they really don't get to this this river this way very much because it's doing so much betting on the flop. So, but yeah, either way, definitely an interesting spot to end on. So, yeah, I guess we can wrap it up here. Definitely pretty good session, I thought. We got through quite a bit of hands. You got to do a little bit of Odin work at the end. I think you guys were pretty on point with a lot of the stuff that you were saying. I think we also got to introduce a lot of interesting spots. At least they were interesting for me. I hope they were for you. And yeah, I guess we can wrap it up with any questions you guys might have. So feel free to fire away. Yeah, it's not that Odin didn't do it very much or didn't check very much. It's just that check is a very low frequency play on the flop. So you're going to get a bit of weird outputs because they're mainly just betting so high frequency on the flop. So it just really doesn't get to that point very often at the end of the hand. So I might have butchered that explanation a little bit, but yeah. Any other questions you guys have before we wrap it up? Either hop on the mic or feel free to type in the chat. Yep, anytime, Slammer. And good luck. I know you're out there grinding, so best of luck to you.
Hey, Pete. It's Pete.
Hello.
Hey,
Yeah, I'm here.
Congratulations. I wanted to tell you in person. That's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Pete fired out a big one here. I got the opportunity to check out the hand history, and I can say for the most part it looked pretty damn good. I mean, he did warn me there was going to be a lot of sun run, but I mean, in any tournament you guys go deep in, you're going to see sun running. So don't feel bad about that. Like, oh, I just ran really good. Like I didn't play very well. Like he played well and he ran well. It takes the combination of both things to win a tournament. Like it's not easy to do both. So as long as we are we can't worry about the outcomes of the hands, the best we can do is just get the money in as best as we can and play each spot to the best of our ability. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this session. If there's nothing else, I guess we'll wrap it up here.
I'll just point out that we can definitely go over that hand history if you guys are intrigued.
Yeah, probably should have pointed that out.
That's all right.
I didn't know if you were going to be here or not, Pete, but yeah, we can.
Yeah, I sort of chimed in at the beginning, then everyone seemed interested in the millie anyway, so.
Yeah. But if you guys want, we can absolutely look over Pete's hand history if he's willing to share that. I think that would be awesome. It'd be good for you guys to see as well. And yeah, so we'll definitely introduce that. Maybe we could even do that on Thursday if you'll be around. I mean, we'll figure it out as we go anyway. I don't think we'll get anywhere close to getting through all of my hands. And if we do Pete's review, I think I'd probably like to pick it up like in the middle so we can kind of see the final table. Obviously, we know he wins it, so I think it'll be interesting to see like the mid to late stages and then like pick up on the final table. So we'll talk about that with the team anyway and see what you guys want to do and see what Pete wants to do, and we can go from there and definitely bring that to you guys here pretty soon. So yeah, just want to say thanks again. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely learned a lot. Hope you guys did too. And I will see you guys on Thursday. Thanks a lot, guys.